The first time it happened that night, I was standing beside a linen-covered table near the back of the reception hall, holding a glass of water with a slice of lime. My sister's new in-laws had just been brought over. My parents were smiling the way they always did in public, polished and easy. My father put a hand lightly on my shoulder and said, "This is Kara." My younger daughter got the ambition. Kara got comfortable. My mother laughed right after him, soft and practiced, like she was smoothing the line into something harmless. The Whitakers gave that polite little laugh people use when they're not sure what else to do. I smiled because that was easier. The band was playing low near the dance floor. I could smell rosemary from the plated dinner and candle wax warming under the lights. Somewhere behind me, a server set down silverware, and I heard the small, clean sound of metal touching china. I remember all of that very clearly. I also remember the text that had come in a few minutes earlier from a man downstairs asking me one simple question. "Still on for 7?" I had not answered yet. That night did not begin at the wedding. By then, too much had already been in motion for too long. The truth is, my family had been telling one story about me for years, and I had spent those same years quietly building a different one. My name is Cara Bennett. I was 28 that winter. I started working in my grandparents' neighborhood market when I was 15. It sat on the corner of Hawthorne and Pine in a brick building with old windows that rattled when trucks passed too fast. The store smelled like citrus, cardboard, ground coffee, and sometimes rain when people came in shaking umbrellas by the door. My grandmother taught me how to face shelves, how to notice when someone looked lost, how to speak to regular customers like you were continuing a conversation instead of beginning one. My grandfather taught me inventory, margins, spoilage, reorder points, and why small mistakes repeat if you don't correct them early. I liked the order of it. I liked knowing where things belonged. My parents liked the market in theory. It was respectable enough to mention to friends. A family business. Something with history. What they did not like was me loving it. In their minds, a grocery store was fine as a backdrop, but not as a future. It was a place a person passed through on the way to something else. My sister, Lauren, was 3 years younger than I was and easier for them to explain. She made people nod. She collected clean milestones. Good school. Better school. Internship. Promotion. She moved through life in a way my parents understood immediately. I moved through it differently. When I graduated high school in 2015, I stayed local. Community college first, because it was affordable and close to the store. Then I transferred to a state school and finished a business degree while working long shifts. I was tired most of the time, but it was a useful kind of tired. My days had structure. Class. Deliveries. Vendor calls. Closing register. Homework after midnight. My parents rarely asked about any of it. If they did, it was in the tone people use when they already think they know the answer. Around Christmas in 2019, I understood more clearly where I stood. My mother mailed out a family card with a photo taken in their living room. Lauren was centered, smiling, one hand resting on an envelope from a university program she had just been accepted into. My father stood behind her looking proud. My mother sat beside her in cream wool. I had been there when the photo was taken. I remembered the lamp running hot beside the sofa and the smell of cinnamon candles on the mantel. In the card that went out, I was gone. Later, when I asked about it, my mother said, "The layout worked better this way." I said okay. Then I folded the card and kept it. Not because I had some plan. I just wanted a clean record of things as they were. A few months later, after my grandmother passed, the market changed hands in a quiet office with beige walls and one buzzing fluorescent panel that needed replacing. My grandfather sat beside me in a gray cardigan, hands folded over a manila envelope. The attorney read through the paperwork in a dry, even voice. My grandmother had left the store to me. Only me. I was the only grandchild who had worked there steadily, the only one who had learned the systems, the only one who had stayed. My parents were surprised in a way they tried to hide but didn't quite manage. On the drive home, my father told me selling would be the smart thing. Take the money. Go back to school. Start over towards something serious. I looked out the window and watched winter trees slide past the car. Then I said I would think about it. I had already decided. I was not going to sell. I was going to keep the store open, stabilize the books, and see what the numbers could support. That was step one. Step two was reducing waste and renegotiating two supplier contracts that had been ignored for years. Step three was simple: keep quiet until the results could speak without me. So I stopped explaining myself. At family dinners, if someone asked what I was doing, I gave the smallest true answer available. I'm working. Busy week. Store's fine. My father would fill the silence for me. Kara's still figuring things out. My mother would add something gentle and dismissive. She's independent. Lauren usually looked down at her plate. I never corrected any of them. Not then. By the spring I was 23, I had a working projection on an old laptop, 3 folders of cost analyses, and a habit of saving every important document twice. One hard copy, one digital. I tracked repairs, foot traffic, seasonal demand, lending terms, and every conversation that mattered. I learned that silence, used properly, is not surrender. It is storage. And for a long time, that was enough. Then one call came in that changed the scale of everything. I took it in the stockroom, with the back door cracked open to let out the smell of produce boxes and damp paper. When I hung up, I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, listening to the refrigerator unit hum against the wall. Then I put the phone face down. And I waited. The call in the stockroom came from a broker I had spoken with twice before and nearly stopped expecting to hear from again. There was a mixed-use property on the edge of Mill River. 12 acres. Restored brick buildings. Event space. Small retail frontage. A handful of loft units. The owner was retiring and wanted a buyer who could move cleanly and keep the place intact. It was still early, still tentative, but my name had been mentioned because I had a reputation for closing without drama and for not stripping old properties down just to make a spreadsheet look better. I stood there listening while the compressor hummed and a delivery truck backed somewhere in the alley with that slow, repeating beep. The concrete floor under my shoes was cold. I remember tracing a thumbnail over the corner of a shipping label while the broker talked through preliminary numbers. When I hung up, I did not tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Lauren. Not even the manager I trusted most at the store. I opened my laptop that night at my kitchen table, pulled the existing acquisition file template I always used, and started a new folder. Date, property address, seller notes, initial comps, operating assumptions. I made tea, let it go cold, and kept working. Around midnight, I printed a one-page sheet and laid it beside 3 others from earlier properties. I liked seeing paper. Screens were useful, but paper slowed me down in the right way. That was how most of my adult life had been built. Quietly. In sequence. One file at a time. The first market had become 2, then 3. Store number 2 opened in 2020 in a neighborhood retail strip with terrible lighting and a landlord who answered emails in fragments. It was not glamorous. The tile was worn. The loading area had drainage issues. The front windows needed replacing within 6 months. But the foot traffic was steady, the surrounding blocks were underserved, and the numbers were solid if I kept labor tight the first year. I signed under an LLC, set up operations, and moved on. Store 3 came the following year. Then 4. I used different entity names depending on financing, liability structure, and property type. Bennett Mercantile. Hawthorne Retail Group. Pine Street Holdings. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would make a relative glance at a storefront sign and think of me. My parents drove past one of those stores every week on the way to church and never noticed a thing. That part used to surprise me. Later it didn't. People rarely see what they have already decided not to look for. By the time Lauren finished college, I had more assets than either of my parents knew how to imagine. I also had enough experience to understand that wealth is not loud when it is functioning properly. It looks like scanned signatures, insurance renewals, reserve accounts, vendor audits, refinancing terms, and calendar reminders. It looks like replacing a freezer before it fails instead of after. It looks like never missing property tax deadlines. It looks like keeping a line of credit available and untouched until it matters. I did not talk about any of this at family gatherings. There was no point. At Lauren's graduation dinner, my mother introduced me to one of Lauren's professors as my older daughter, Kara. She's still deciding where she wants to land. I was wearing a simple black dress and carrying a leather folder with a signed lease in it because I had come straight from a site visit. My father asked Lauren 3 detailed questions about her next step and did not ask me one about mine. I sat through the meal, folded my napkin neatly, and went home after dessert. In my apartment, I took off my shoes, opened my banking app, checked 3 balances, then closed the screen. Not for comfort, just for confirmation. Around that same time, I learned something about Lauren that she did not know I knew. She had nearly lost the chance to stay in school after her first year. My parents' finances were in worse shape than they let on. My father's consulting work had dried up. A business arrangement he once described to everyone as temporary turbulence had actually collapsed. Their credit had been damaged for long enough that traditional lending was nearly impossible. Lauren was doing well academically, but good grades do not pay invoices by themselves. I found out because my mother left a file folder open on their dining room table one afternoon when I stopped by with groceries. I was putting yogurt and produce into their refrigerator while they argued quietly in the den. Not yelling, just that sharp, flattened tone people use when they've had the same conversation too many times. I wasn't trying to overhear, but the folder was there in plain sight: tuition statement, overdue amount, payment deadlines, highlighted warnings. I stood at the table for a moment, then closed the folder and put it exactly where I had found it. A week later, I met with someone at the university foundation office. I made an appointment under my full legal name, signed a confidentiality agreement, and established a family memorial scholarship in honor of my grandparents. I set the criteria myself: quiet resilience, consistency, academic effort without entitlement. It was not written for Lauren alone, but I knew she would qualify. I also knew she would refuse the help if she knew it came directly from me. So I structured it to be received without a conversation. That is not always the healthiest way to help people. I know that now. But at 22, with the family I had, it felt like the cleanest option. The award covered what she needed. Then it covered the next year. Then the next 2 after that. I kept every document: foundation statements, wire confirmations, correspondence, award summaries, acknowledgement letters. I stored copies in labeled binders in a locked cabinet and later in a safe deposit box when the paper volume outgrew the cabinet. Each section had tabs: education, real estate, family support, guarantees, tax records. I did not organize things because I was planning some grand reveal. I organized them because disorder makes people vulnerable, and I had no intention of being careless with facts. The same pattern repeated in other areas. In 2021, my parents were close to losing their house after a failed refinance stalled and a lender backed away. They did not come to me first. They had already exhausted easier options by then. My father called late on a Thursday evening and left a voicemail that sounded smaller than I had ever heard him. "Kara, if you can call me back tonight, I'd appreciate it. It's important." I called. He explained in pieces. There was a deadline. The prior arrangement had fallen through. They needed a guarantor, at least temporarily, or they would miss the window entirely. I sat at my desk while he talked and wrote down figures in the margin of an old utility bill: loan amount, property value, existing debt, term, rate. When he was done, I asked for the documents. He was quiet for a second, then said, "You'd really look at it." I said, "Send the documents." He sent them 26 minutes later. I reviewed everything before midnight: income statements, property appraisal, debt structure, lender conditions. I flagged 3 issues, requested 1 correction, and had my attorney look at the guarantee language the next morning. By afternoon, I signed through an LLC. Clean, limited, documented. My parents kept the house. No one mentioned it again unless logistics required it. There was no long conversation, no sudden closeness, no change in how I was described in public. The help entered their lives the same way a lot of my work did, through forms, signatures, and systems they benefited from without really seeing. A year later, my father needed another favor, this time tied to a small business expansion that a bank would not back without stronger collateral. Again, he came to me privately. Again, the tone was urgent and humbler than usual. Again, I asked for numbers before feelings. That became one of the rules I lived by. When emotion is high, verify facts first. When pressure is urgent, slow the sequence down. When family asks for help, put everything in writing. Those rules protected me more than people ever did. By the time Moran got engaged, I had built a life that was both very visible and somehow invisible to the people closest to me. I owned multiple stores. I had commercial leases in force, vendor relationships across 3 counties, and enough liquid reserves to move quickly when the right property appeared. And still, at family dinners, I was the daughter who worked in grocery. Lauren called me herself to tell me about the engagement. I was in my office above store 4, going through quarterly shrink reports. It was raining lightly against the window, that soft tapping sound that almost disappears once you settle into it. She sounded happy, truly happy. I could hear people moving around in the background and guessed she had stepped away from someone to call me. I asked about the ring, the proposal, his family, where they were thinking of getting married. She told me about a venue she had fallen in love with near the river. Old brick, restored buildings, a courtyard lit with string lights, a private suite upstairs. Beautiful in the kind of way people photograph before they fully understand what it costs. I said it sounded lovely. Then I opened the file on my laptop and looked again at the property packet sitting in front of me. Same place, same address. I did not say that either. A month later, there was a dinner at my parents' house where Lauren passed her phone around the table and showed everyone photos from the venue's website. My mother kept pressing her fingers to her chest like she was overwhelmed by the elegance of it all. My father was already talking about how to make it happen, even though the price was plainly beyond what they could comfortably manage. I sat there with my water glass, watching the screen move from hand to hand. The hardwood floors in their dining room still creaked near the doorway. The overhead light cast that yellow tone it always had. My father used the phrase, for Lauren, we'll find a way, and my mother nodded as though wanting something badly was the same as solving it responsibly. I said very little. The acquisition process for the property was already underway by then. Inspection schedules, environmental review, historic preservation notes, financing structure, closing checklist. My attorneys had drafts in progress. I had already decided, if the purchase went through before the wedding, I would not interfere with Lauren's plans. The venue would honor the contract as written. Operations would remain stable. Staff would be reassured. Nothing about the event itself would be made more difficult because ownership changed. That was the baseline. After that, I made a second set of decisions. I would cover any overages above the original contracted amount if the numbers stayed within reason. I would do it quietly. And I would not tell my parents. Not because I wanted some future scene. At that point, I still thought silence might be the kindest way to move through it. Lauren was not cruel in the direct way my parents could be. She was shaped by them, yes. Careless sometimes. Passive often. But not malicious. She had grown up in the same house I had. She had simply been loved more visibly inside it. The planning moved forward. Group messages I was not included in. Dress appointments I heard about afterward. A bridal shower invitation that never came. Seating discussions that seemed to happen around me as though I were a distant relative instead of a sister. I noticed all of it. I said almost nothing. By December, the property closed. I signed the final papers in a conference room that smelled faintly of toner and cedar polish. There were 6 signature tabs, 2 revised exhibits, a wire confirmation, and one final addendum tied to preservation requirements for the old mill structure. I read every page before signing. When it was finished, the attorney slid the completed packet into a dark folder and said, "Congratulations, Miss Bennett." I thanked him, took the folder, and went straight back to work. That same afternoon, I sent one email to the venue director. Any overage charges for the Bennett-Mercer wedding above the original contract amount should be billed to ownership and removed from the client-facing total. Do not disclose source. Confirm receipt. He confirmed within 8 minutes. I archived the message. Then I waited. Once the property closed, I treated Lauren's wedding the way I treated any other live operation. Not emotionally, logistically. I asked for current vendor totals, projected overages, staffing plans, weather contingencies, and payment deadlines. I did not ask for opinions. I did not need reassurance. I wanted a clean picture of what was in motion and what could still go wrong. The venue director's name was Aaron Pike. Early 40s. Steady voice. The kind of person who answered direct questions directly, which I appreciated. Our first long call lasted 23 minutes. I took notes by hand in a legal pad while he walked me through the event schedule, pending balances, catering revisions, floral upgrades, and a few last-minute requests from Lauren's side that had increased costs more than my parents probably realized. I could hear keyboards in the background where he was. A printer started up once, then stopped. He apologized for the noise. I told him it was fine and kept writing. At the end of the call, I gave him 3 instructions. First, the contract terms were to remain exactly as agreed from the client's perspective. No confusion. No operational disruptions. Second, any approved overages beyond the original venue balance were to be transferred internally and marked settled through ownership review. Third, my name was not to be mentioned unless I gave permission. He paused for just a moment after that third point. Then he said, understood. That was enough. Over the next several weeks, updates came in steadily. Revised menu pricing, additional floral installations, extended bar package, rental modifications, outdoor heat support, transportation adjustments. Nothing unusual for a wedding of that size, just expensive in the ordinary way that people often fail to notice until the invoice arrives. I paid the overages in phases. One transfer covered heating rentals for the terrace after the weather forecast shifted colder. Another covered upgraded linens and a seating change that had ripple effects through staffing and rentals. Then there was a larger internal adjustment tied to floral expansion and a suite package enhancement that had been added late. Each time, I asked for supporting numbers first. Each time, I stored the documentation. Invoice. Approval trail. Transfer confirmation. Internal note. Closed. There is a kind of peace in well-kept records. They do not care who feels guilty. They do not get flustered. They do not soften facts to protect anyone's self-image. They just sit there and wait to be read correctly. My parents, meanwhile, seemed to believe the wedding was somehow carrying itself forward on charm and momentum. My mother began saying things like, people always help when it's for love, as if vendors regularly absorbed 5-figure costs out of sentiment. My father took credit in that vague public way some people do when they want the appearance of provision without the discipline of planning. He talked about making things happen for Lauren. He liked saying that around Grant's family. Grant's parents were polished, successful, and observant. His father was in commercial real estate. His mother had the kind of composure that made other people sit straighter around her. They were never rude to me. If anything, they were more careful than my own family. But I could see my parents performing in front of them, trying to shape a version of us that sounded cleaner, more balanced, more impressive. I let them. Not because I agreed. Because interruption is only useful when it changes an outcome. At the engagement party that summer, I learned I would not be given a +1. My mother told me in the kitchen while spooning whipped filling into tiny pastry shells she had not made herself, but intended to present as though she had. The refrigerator hummed. Ice shifted in a glass pitcher on the counter. She said, "We're keeping this one intimate." I looked around the room behind her at 60 guests and nodded once. "Of course," I said. She smiled, relieved by how easy I made things. That was one of my older habits. I knew that. I made it easy for people to underestimate the cost of how they treated me. I was not in the bridal party. I was not invited to the dress appointments. I was not added to planning threads unless something practical needed to be relayed. Once, Lauren sent me a venue update by mistake instead of to a bridesmaid, then followed it with, "Oops, wrong thread, LOL." I looked at the message, set the phone down, and went back to reviewing a vendor contract for Store 7. That was the shape of things. I existed nearby. Useful, but not central. Known, but not really seen. By late January, the final guest count settled just above 200. Aaron sent me the complete event sheet in PDF form: timeline, floor plan, loading schedule, vendor access windows, table assignments, suite prep, transportation order, emergency contacts. I printed the whole packet and read it at my dining table with a yellow highlighter and a pencil. That was when I saw my reception seat. Table 18. Back corner. Near service access. The placement itself did not surprise me. What did catch my attention was who I had been grouped with. Two teenagers from Grant's extended family, a cousin still in high school, an uncle's girlfriend no one seemed to know well, and a couple of names I vaguely recognized from the miscellaneous relatives category every large family event seems to produce. I looked at the chart for a long moment. Then I turned the page and kept reading. The rehearsal dinner plan arrived a few days later. Same pattern. I was seated at the far end, between younger relatives, nowhere near my parents, nowhere near Lauren, nowhere near anyone who might naturally ask me a question and wait for the real answer. I made no request to change it. Silence is most useful when it is chosen, not forced. I wanted that clear in my own mind. So I made the choice deliberately. I would attend. I would be polite. I would not lobby for a better seat at a table where no one had made room for me willingly. A week before the wedding, I took one more precaution. I pulled selected records from storage and made a compact paper file. Nothing excessive, just enough. A scholarship payment statement. A refinance document with my guarantee attached. A prior email from my father asking for urgent financial help. The ownership closing summary for the venue. A billing adjustment memo. I did not bring everything. I had no intention of dumping years of private records into a family argument. I chose only what established a pattern and a timeline. Facts that could be understood in seconds, not interpreted for days. Then I put those papers in a plain folder and slid it into the inside drawer of my desk. At the time, I still did not know whether I would need them. But there is a difference between planning conflict and preparing for clarity. I was preparing for clarity. The rehearsal dinner was held in one of the venue's private dining rooms the night before the ceremony. I arrived a few minutes early and checked in with staff before going upstairs. I did not announce myself as owner. There was no reason to. The room was warm from candles and body heat. Low conversation filled the corners. Glassware caught the light. The smell of butter and roasted herbs lingered from the kitchen pass. Place cards were already set. Mine was exactly where the floor plan said it would be. At the far end, near the younger relatives. One of the boys at my table looked at me and said, "I think we got the kids section." I smiled. "Looks that way." He laughed and went back to his phone. Across the room, my parents were seated close to Grant's family and the officiant. My mother had one of her careful social smiles on. My father leaned back in his chair like he belonged near the center of whatever room he was in. Lauren was glowing in that tired, over-attended way brides often are the night before a wedding. Happy but stretched thin. At one point, one of the younger cousins asked what I did for work. "I run stores," I said. He tilted his head. "Like retail?" "Yes. My mom says retail is just what people do until they figure out their real job." He said it casually, not cruelly. Borrowed language. Handed down without examination. I cut a piece of chicken and set my fork down before answering. "A lot of people say things they haven't thought through," I said. He looked at me for a second, then shrugged. "That's probably true." Dinner moved on. Later in the evening, my mother stood for a toast. She thanked Lauren for being a light in the family. Thanked Grant for loving her well. Thanked everyone who had helped make the weekend possible. She never looked toward my end of the table. Not once. That did not hurt in some fresh way. It was too familiar for that. What I felt instead was a kind of settling. A final internal adjustment. Something moving from uncertainty into structure. When I left that night, I did not go straight home. I stopped in the venue office on the ground floor. Aaron was there, jacket off, tie loosened, reviewing the next day's timeline with two staff members. He dismissed them when he saw me and closed the office door behind them. A lamp on the credenza cast a soft yellow circle over the desk. I could hear distant laughter from upstairs through the ceiling, muffled and indistinct. He asked, "Everything all right?" I set my small folder on the desk, but did not open it. Yes, I said. I just want to confirm tomorrow's sequence. He picked up the printed timeline. I pointed to the post-dinner segment. Best man toast ends here. First dance is cued after. I want to pause in between. He looked at the line item, then at me. For an owner acknowledgement, he asked carefully. Yes. He waited. I appreciated that he did not fill the silence. He did not ask whether I was sure in a theatrical way. He did not try to become part of the story. He stayed in his role, which made it easier for me to stay in mine. I said no embellishment, no speech, no surprise beyond the facts. You state the ownership change, the date, and the wedding gift adjustments. Nothing personal, nothing pointed. He nodded once. I continued. After that, return the evening to the couple immediately. No extra attention on me. No spotlight. I can do that. If at any point tomorrow I cancel, you cancel. No questions. Understood. I slid the folder a few inches closer to him. If anyone challenges the announcement afterward, these are backup confirmations only. Not for circulation. Not unless necessary. He rested a hand lightly on the folder, but did not open it. Got it. I looked at the timeline one last time. There are moments when emotion tries to make itself useful by rushing ahead of events. I have learned not to let it. I stood there and reduced the next day into sequence. Step 1, attend. Step 2, observe. Step 3, decide at the time, not before it. That helped. It always did. I thanked Aaron and left through the side entrance. Outside, the air was cold enough to sharpen everything. Gravel shifted under my shoes. Across the property, the courtyard lights glowed against the old brick walls. Someone inside was testing music levels for the next day, just a low wash of sound through glass and distance. I sat in my car for a minute before starting it. Then I took out my phone and opened the draft message I had prepared in case I needed it. Still on for 7? I read it. I did not send it yet. Then I put the phone face down. And I drove home. The morning of the wedding was quiet in the way large events sometimes are before they become loud. I woke up before my alarm, made coffee, and stood at my kitchen counter while the machine finished dripping. The apartment was still. No television. No music. Just the low mechanical clicks from the coffee maker and a truck somewhere outside backing into a loading zone. Light came in pale through the window over the sink. I remember wiping a small circle of condensation from the counter with the side of my hand and thinking, very plainly, that the day would go one of two ways. Either nothing would happen, and I would leave with the truth still intact and private. Or something would happen, and I would stop protecting people who had never protected me. I drank half the coffee, left the rest in the mug, and got dressed slowly. The dress I wore was navy, simple, and well cut. Not memorable on purpose. I chose low heels because I knew I would be on my feet longer than most guests. I put the paper file into my bag, checked for my phone, keys, and wallet, then stood by the front door for 1 extra second before leaving. I have a habit when I'm under pressure. I pause at thresholds. Not to hesitate. Just to make sure I'm entering the next thing intentionally. The drive to the venue took a little over half an hour. The roads were dry, traffic light, sky clear but cold-looking. At red lights, I reviewed the day in sequence the same way I would for a store opening or an acquisition close. Arrive. Check in quietly. Stay observant. Make no emotional decisions in motion. If needed, act once. Then stop. That was the framework. It kept the day orderly in my mind. When I got to the property, vendors were already moving in and out of side entrances with garment bags, floral crates, rolling racks, and coffee cups. The courtyard smelled faintly of damp brick and cut greenery. One of the planners crossed the drive with a clipboard tucked against her chest and an earpiece wire showing against her hair. Someone inside was testing a microphone. 2 short bursts of feedback, then silence. I parked around the side instead of in the main guest lot and went in through the office corridor. Aaron was already there. Jacket on. Tie straight. Calm. He gave me a short nod and handed me a revised operations sheet without a word. 1 table count had shifted. Weather timing had improved slightly. Catering was on schedule. The adjusted overage total had been reconciled. I looked at the final line and gave the paper back. All settled. I asked. Yes. No client-facing changes? None. Good. He hesitated for half a beat, then said, Do you want me to hold the 7 o'clock pause unless I hear from you directly? Yes. He nodded. Understood. That was all. I went upstairs to the bridal suite a little before 11 because Lauren had texted the night before asking me to stop by if I had time. The suite smelled like hairspray, steamed fabric, perfume, and the faint sweetness of bakery boxes someone had opened earlier. Garment bags hung from hooks. Makeup cases were spread over the long counter under the mirrors. Bridesmaids moved around in satin robes with coffee cups in hand, speaking in half-finished sentences the way people do when they've been awake too long and everything matters at once. Lauren was by the window having a last section of her hair pinned into place. She looked at me in the mirror and smiled, relieved maybe just tired. You came, she said. Of course. I handed her the gift I had brought, and she took it with both hands, surprised by the weight. Kitchen mixer. Good one. Useful, not decorative. Something built to last. My mother noticed immediately and said, Kara, you didn't need to spend that kind of money. The tone was light, but there it was underneath. The old assumption. That anything generous from me must be slightly reckless. Slightly beyond my means. I said, it's fine. My mother looked me over then, quick and tidy, the way she used to before dinners or church or any event where appearance served as a form of explanation. That dress is good, she said. Simple. Appropriate. I nodded once. One of the bridesmaids, a woman I had met twice and never spoken with for more than 3 minutes, asked whether I had come alone. Before I could answer, my mother said, Kara's very focused on work right now. Then she laughed softly as though that explained a whole personality. A couple of the women gave the small social smiles people use to move past awkwardness without naming it. Lauren looked toward me, and for a second I thought she might say something. She didn't. She just reached for the tissue someone handed her and turned back toward the mirror. That was the pattern. Not active cruelty from her most of the time. Just absence where presence would have mattered. I stayed another 10 minutes. Helped move 2 boxes out of the walkway. Straightened a chair. Told Lauren she looked beautiful because she did. Then I left before the room closed in on me. The hallway outside the suite was quieter. Thick carpet. Warm light from old sconces. A faint draft near the back staircase. I stood there for a second and let the noise from inside settle behind the door. Then I heard my parents. They were in a side room nearby, not speaking loudly but not quietly enough. My father said, if Grant's family asks about Kara, just keep it simple. My mother answered, retail management. He gave a short laugh. That sounds too polished. A pause. Then he said, just say she works in grocery. Make it self-aware. Better to joke about it than have them wonder. My mother made that little sound she makes when she agrees with something she already knows is unkind, but finds socially useful. I stood still and listened. Not long. Maybe a minute. Maybe less. Long enough. There is a moment in some situations where confusion leaves and structure takes its place. That was the moment for me. Not because what they said was new. It wasn't. The content was familiar. The setting changed it. The timing changed it. The fact that they were still managing me like a social inconvenience, on a day they were already standing inside something I had paid to protect, changed it. I did not go in. I did not confront them in the hallway. I walked away, down the stairs, through the office corridor, and outside to the service path behind the kitchen. Then I took out my phone. My hands were steady. I texted Aaron, still on for 7? He replied almost immediately, yes. I can still cancel if you want. I looked at the screen for a few seconds. A catering cart rolled past the far end of the corridor. Someone called for extra stemware from inside the loading bay. The smell of stock simmering in the kitchen drifted through the back door every time it opened. I typed, no changes. 7 exactly. He answered, understood. I put the phone away. Then I waited. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way weddings often are even when families are not. Guests filed into the courtyard under clear winter light. Programs rustled. Chairs shifted against stone. The quartet played something light and familiar while late arrivals hurried into place. I had been seated far enough back that no one needed to step around me to reach the aisle. That felt intentional. Fine. Easier, really. From where I sat, I could see the old brick walls catching the late afternoon sun. I could smell cold air, roses, and the sharp, clean note of clipped greenery. Lauren came down the aisle on my father's arm, and every face around me softened toward her. She looked radiant, and for a while I let the ceremony just be what it was. A promise. A public beginning. A day that should have belonged to her. That mattered to me more than anyone there knew. When she and Grant said their vows, she thanked our parents for all they had done to help her get there. That was hard to hear, though not because she meant harm. She was working with the story she had been given. That is different from malice, but it still has consequences. I did not react. I sat still and watched. After the ceremony, guests moved into cocktail hour across the terrace and interior hallways. Staff circulated with trays. Glasses touched. Small groups formed and loosened and formed again. I stayed mostly to the side, speaking when spoken to, letting the evening reveal its own shape. 3 different conversations reached me without effort. One guest asked another whether I was the sister who works at one of those specialty markets. Someone else said, she seems quiet. Another answered, families always have one. None of it surprised me. What did stay with me was the ease of it. How quickly people build a complete picture from a few handed-down sentences. How little evidence they require when the story is socially convenient. Around 5:15, my mother walked past me with Grant's mother and made eye contact for one brief second. I thought she might stop. She didn't. She guided the conversation gently away and kept moving. At 5:30, the reception doors opened. I found my place card at table 18 exactly where the floor plan said it would be. Back corner. Near service access. One of the teenagers from the rehearsal dinner was already seated and gave me an almost apologetic smile. Kid table again, he said. Looks consistent, I answered. He laughed. Dinner service began on time. Salad first. Then the main course. The room glowed under warm overhead lights and candles reflected in glassware. Music stayed low enough for conversation. The head table was arranged beautifully. My parents sat with Grant's family near the center, where visibility mattered most to them. And then, just as I had heard them rehearse earlier, the introductions began. They worked the room in stages, bringing Grant's parents and a few relatives from table to table. Distant cousins first, then family friends, then eventually our section. My father rested a hand on the back of my chair and said, smiling, and this is Kara. He gave a small pause, the kind designed to set up a line. Then he said, our family's retail representative. My mother added, she keeps us humble. There was polite laughter. Thin. Uneasy. Grant's father smiled the way experienced people do when they know they are being asked to approve of something they don't quite respect. Retail's a serious business, he said. It can be, I answered. My father laughed again and said, we're still waiting for her to decide what she really wants to do. I looked at him. Not angrily. Not even coldly. Just directly. Then I smiled once and said, that won't be necessary. He did not understand the sentence. No one there did. But I did. The introductions moved on. My parents drifted back toward the center of the room with Grant's family. The teenager beside me leaned closer and said under his breath, that was rough. I took a sip of water. I've heard worse, I said. And I had. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed against the table linen. A single message from Aaron. Still good for 7? I read it once. Then I locked the screen without answering right away. Across the room, my father was in mid-story, hands moving, face easy. My mother was laughing. Lauren was smiling at something Grant had said, unaware of the exact point the evening had reached. I let a few seconds pass. Then I picked up the phone again and typed back 3 words. Yes. 7 exactly. After that, I set the phone face down. And I waited. At exactly 7, the best man finished his toast and the room rose into a brief, warm round of applause. It was the kind of applause people give when they are ready for the evening to keep moving. The first dance was next. Staff were already in position. The band leader had shifted his attention toward the couple. A server passed behind my table carrying 2 fresh bottles of wine. Somewhere near the back, a chair leg scraped lightly against the floor and then stopped. Then Aaron stepped forward. He did not rush. He did not look nervous. He simply moved to the microphone near the dance floor and waited until the room settled enough to hear him. The timing was clean, professional, exactly what I had asked for. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Aaron Pike, Director of Operations here at Mill River House. I'm sorry to interrupt the schedule for just a moment, but ownership asked me to share something brief with the couple and their guests before the first dance." The room quieted in that natural ripple large gatherings make when attention changes direction. Lauren looked mildly confused. Grant turned toward Aaron with the polite alertness of someone assuming a venue note was coming. My parents were still smiling at first. Grant's family sat up a little straighter. Aaron kept his tone even. "As some of you may know, this property changed ownership in December. The new ownership group has a personal connection to tonight's celebration and asked that I extend a gift to the bride and groom on their behalf." A few guests glanced around, curious now. Then he said, clearly, without flourish, "The principal owner of Mill River House is Cara Bennett, sister of the bride." He turned slightly and gestured toward my table. That was all it took. The room did not explode. Real rooms usually don't. They stop first. That was what happened. A full stop. Forks paused in midair. Someone near the head table lowered a glass too fast and it touched the linen with a soft thud. One of the bridesmaids turned all the way around in her chair. Grant looked at Lauren. Lauren looked at me. My father went still in a way I had never seen before. My mother's expression emptied for a second, as if whatever social response she normally reached for had simply failed to arrive. I stayed seated. I did not wave. I did not stand. I did not try to help them recover. Aaron continued in the same calm voice. "On behalf of ownership, the remaining adjusted balance associated with tonight's event has been waived in full. In addition, the couple has been upgraded to the owner's suite this evening, and a private anniversary dinner package has been reserved for them next year, compliments of Ms. Bennett." He gave a small nod toward the head table. "Congratulations to Lauren and Grant, and thank you all for being here." Then he set the microphone down and stepped back exactly as planned. For one long second, maybe 2, no one moved. Then applause started from somewhere near the planner's station. A few people joined in. Then Grant's father stood and clapped once, firmly, which changed the room. After that, the rest followed. Not wild, not theatrical, just sustained and unmistakable. I still stayed seated. That mattered to me. I had not done any of it to become the center of a wedding. I had done it because facts, once spoken plainly, no longer require permission. Standing up would have turned it into a performance. Remaining seated kept it where it belonged. Across the room, my mother was staring at me like she had lost the thread of something she thought she understood. My father's face had gone pale under the warm reception lights. Lauren looked not angry exactly, but disoriented, as if several years had shifted place at once and she could not yet tell where to put her feet. The applause faded. The band did not start immediately. No one seemed to know whether they should. That was the only part one regretted, the small operational pause I had created in the middle of a day that was supposed to move smoothly for Lauren. Then Grant's father rose from his chair and walked over to my table. He was composed, curious, not offended. A businessman first, I thought. He extended his hand, and I stood to meet him because that, unlike a performance, was basic respect. "Cara," he said, "I'm Daniel Mercer. I think I owe you my congratulations." I shook his hand. "Thank you." He looked around the room once, then back at me. "Mill River House was on the market last year, wasn't it?" "Yes." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You closed it?" "In December." "For how much?" "For .3. That made him smile, but not socially. Professionally. The kind of smile that appears when someone hears a number and immediately understands what it means. That's a strong buy. It made sense at the time. He gave a short laugh under his breath. "How old are you?" 28. He studied my face for a second, then glanced toward my father and back again. "That's remarkable." I said nothing. He knew enough not to press. Good people in business learn quickly when a silence is carrying useful information. He nodded once, then returned to his table. On the way back, he stopped beside his wife and leaned down to say something I couldn't hear. She looked at me differently after that. Less politely. More directly. A few minutes later, the planner crossed the room and bent near my parents' table. I could not hear every word from where I sat, but I heard enough. "It's been such a pleasure working with your daughter," she said. My mother, still trying to restore a normal sequence, answered automatically, "Lauren's been so excited." The planner gave a small confused smile and said, "I meant Kara. She's approved every major adjustment since spring." That landed harder than the announcement itself, I think, because it confirmed duration. Not a surprise gesture. Not a lucky purchase. A sustained pattern. Decision after decision, month after month, all happening in a reality my parents had never even suspected existed. My father looked down at the tablecloth after that. My mother's eyes filled, though she was still too controlled to let herself cry openly in the room. At the head table, I saw one of Lauren's college friends pull out her phone and show her something. Lauren read it, frowned, then read it again. Another girl leaned in. I recognized the sequence before I knew the details. Search results, scholarship records, public acknowledgments. The pieces were beginning to connect in other parts of the room now, independent of me. That is how truth usually spreads once it has a clear point of entry. Not in one dramatic wave. In linked realizations. A few guests from my side of the family already knew enough history to fill in other blanks on their own. One cousin approached my parents' table with a face I recognized from every family event since childhood, intelligent, quiet, and impossible to distract with social smoothing once she had a fact in hand. She asked my father a question. He answered too fast. She checked something on her phone. Then she turned and looked directly across the room at me. I did not need to hear the exchange to understand it. Records have a way of surfacing once people know where to look. The first dance was delayed only a few minutes. Eventually, the band started and Lauren and Grant moved onto the floor. The song was soft, familiar. The room adjusted around it, though not fully. Conversations were changed now. Expressions had changed. My parents had become visible in a new way, and they knew it. During the dance, I sat back down and folded my hands in my lap. The teenager beside me whispered, "Did you really buy this whole place?" "Yes." He let out a breath like he had been holding it for a while. "That's incredible." I gave him a small smile and looked back toward the dance floor. Across the room, my mother was crying now in the restrained, almost shocked way some people do when the humiliation is too public to hide and too deserved to deny. My father had the fixed expression of a man trying to solve something that had already moved past the point of negotiation. Lauren danced through the song with tears in her eyes. Grant kept one hand steady at her back and looked more grounded than anyone else in her family. At 8 o'clock, just after the first dance and parent dances had finished, Lauren came straight toward me. She didn't drift over. She didn't send someone first. She walked directly from the floor to table 18 with her dress gathered in one hand and stopped in front of me, breathing unevenly. "Kara," she said softly, "I need to talk to you." I looked up at her. Her mascara was holding, barely. Her hands were trembling. Behind her, Grant approached, but kept a respectful step back. He didn't try to speak over her. Lauren swallowed. "Please. Somewhere private." I stood. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just once, in the cleanest possible way. I looked across the room to where my parents sat frozen at their table, then back at Lauren. 5 minutes, I said. Upstairs. Grant nodded once in thanks. Aaron, who had been standing near the side corridor giving the room enough distance to recover, saw us move and came over immediately without being called. He understood the shift for what it was, a family matter now, but one that needed a room, a door, and a controlled perimeter. "This way," he said. We followed him out of the reception hall and into the quieter corridor that led upstairs. The carpets softened our steps. Music from below dimmed once the door closed behind us. Lauren walked in silence. Grant stayed beside her. My parents followed several paces back, not speaking. No one tried to stop the movement. No one asked where we were going. That was another thing facts do once they settle into a room. They create their own path. Aaron opened the bridal suite door and stepped aside. "Take your time," he said. "I'll stay nearby." Then he pulled the door closed behind us. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The room looked different now from earlier in the day. More scattered. More lived in. A veil draped over the back of a chair. One champagne flute half full on the vanity. Hairpins on the carpet near the mirror. The air still held perfume and hairspray, but underneath it now was the warmer scent of people who had cried and argued and been under lights too long. Lauren turned toward me first. Her voice broke on the first sentence. Why didn't I know any of this? Before I answered, my father stepped forward from the wall and said, "I think we all need to calm down and talk this through carefully." I looked at him. Then I said, very evenly, "No. We need to stop rearranging the facts." That ended the room's last illusion of softness. My mother sat down hard on the edge of the sofa as though her knees had decided for her. Grant stayed near Lauren but didn't interrupt. Aaron's footsteps faded outside the door. Then there was only the suite, the closed room, and the papers in my bag. I set the bag on the vanity and opened it. Then I took the first document out. I laid the papers on the vanity one at a time. Not in a stack. Not dramatically. Just side by side, with enough space between them that no one would need to touch one to see the next. The first was a foundation payment summary tied to Lawrence University. My name was not displayed in the public-facing way it would have been on a gift announcement, but the transfer trail was clear enough for anyone in that room to understand what it was and where it had gone. The second was a refinance document for my parents' house, with the guarantee page attached. The third was an email from my father from 2 years earlier asking for emergency help with a business loan after a bank turned him down. The fourth was the ownership closing summary for Mill River House and the internal billing note showing the wedding adjustments that had been moved off Lauren's account. I stepped back. Then I waited. Lauren was the first to move. She picked up the university statement with both hands, the way people do when paper suddenly feels heavier than it should. Her eyes moved across the page once, then back up, then down again as if reading it twice might produce a different meaning. "This is my tuition," she said quietly. "Yes." Her voice got smaller. "How many years?" "4." She kept looking at the statement. "All 4." "Yes." She sat down then, not gracefully, just carefully and all at once, onto the edge of the upholstered bench beneath the mirror. Her dress spread around her shoes in a wide pale circle. Grant moved closer to her but did not take the paper away. My mother made a sound like she had tried to speak and lost the sentence halfway out. My father was still standing. He looked at the refinance document next and said, "Kara, that was temporary support. We were going to," I cut in, still calm. "No, you were going to lose the house." He stopped. I pointed to the signature line. "You called on a Thursday night. I asked for the documents. You sent them. I signed the following day through a limited guarantee structure. The refinance closed because I stepped in. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to." The room had shifted fully by then. We were no longer in family storytelling. We were in sequence and evidence. Grant picked up the closing summary for the venue and looked over it once before setting it down more carefully than he had found it. "You own this place before the wedding," he said. "Yes." "And the balance that got removed in December?" I covered the difference above the original contract amount. He nodded slowly and looked at me with a steadiness I appreciated. Not pity. Not confusion. Recognition. "Thank you," he said. He was the first person in that room to say it simply, without trying to manage what the thank you meant for anyone else. Lauren put the tuition record in her lap and covered her mouth with one hand. "I thought." She stopped and tried again. "I thought I earned that scholarship." "You did," I said. "The criteria were real. Your grades were real. The award was legitimate. I funded it. That's the part you didn't know." She looked up at me then, eyes red, face open in a way I had not seen since we were much younger. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "Because you would have refused it," I thought. Because I had already learned that the cleanest way to help in our family was to remove myself from the story entirely. Because by then I trusted process more than I trusted any conversation we were likely to have. What I said out loud was, at the time, it seemed better that way. It was the truth, though not all of it. My mother looked at the email from my father as if it might vanish if she stared hard enough. I never saw that, she said. That doesn't surprise me, I answered. She started to cry in a quieter, more defeated way than downstairs. No careful social control now. Just fatigue and the slow arrival of what had been true for years. My father finally sat down. Not because he had decided to, because there was nowhere left to stand from. Kara, he said, we never meant. I stopped him again. Please don't tell me what you meant. Tell me what happened. He opened his mouth and then closed it. That was the first honest moment he had given me all evening. Lauren looked between us, then toward our parents, and I could see the rearranging happening in real time. Memory after memory being relabeled. Not erased. Relabeled. That process is painful because it makes a person question not just what was hidden, but how much they accepted without examination. My mother wiped at her face and said, "We thought you wanted distance." I leaned one hand lightly against the back of the chair nearest me. You cropped me out of a Christmas card, I said. You left me out of wedding events. You introduced me tonight like I was a social problem to manage. That isn't distance. That's removal. No one answered. I continued, because there was no point softening it now. If I had been struggling, if I had actually been exactly who you described me as, would any of this be less wrong? That landed harder than the documents. People can apologize more easily for underestimating success than for devaluing a person before success was visible. One sounds like a mistake. The other is a system. My father looked down at his hands. My mother said, barely above a whisper, no, it was not a full reckoning. But it was the first true answer. Grant stayed where he was beside Lauren, one hand resting on the back of the bench, not on her, just near enough to be there if she needed it. I noticed that. Restraint often tells me more about people than comfort does. Lauren finally stood and came a little closer to the vanity. She looked at the 4 papers again, then at me. I didn't know, she said. Not about school. Not about the venue. Not about the house. I know. That doesn't make it okay. No, tears started again, but she didn't turn away from me this time. I should have asked more. I should have noticed more. I let that sit in the room. Then I said yes. Not to punish her. To keep the sentence honest. She nodded once, accepting that. My father tried again, but softer this time. We can fix this. I looked at him and answered the way I would answer anyone asking for a repair after long-term damage. Not tonight. He flinched a little at that, probably because for the first time I was speaking to him in rules instead of roles. Not as daughter to father. As one adult setting conditions for reality. I picked up the email and folded it once. Then I said, here's what happens next. All 4 of them looked at me. I kept my tone level. Lauren, this is your wedding day. You go back downstairs when you're ready and finish it with Grant. None of this is your guest's business beyond what they've already seen. She nodded immediately. I turned to my parents. You are not going to follow me around tonight. You are not going to stop me in hallways. You are not going to try to force a conversation before I leave. My mother started to say my name, but I kept going. If you want contact later, you can write. Not call. Not show up. Write. That gave them shape. Process. A boundary they could understand because it had instructions. My father's face tightened. Kara, we're your parents. Yes, I said. And for years I have been the one operating like the responsible adult in this family. That part is over. Silence again. Real silence this time. Not empty. Settled. My mother asked, what does over mean? It means I'm not stepping in quietly anymore when there's a crisis you created and a story you still want to tell about me at the same time. I folded the remaining papers and put them back into my bag. I left no copies behind. Then I added the one thing I had not planned to say until it arrived in the room on its own. I did all of it because I loved you, I said. That's what made it possible. But love without respect becomes expensive. I'm not paying that bill anymore. No one spoke after that. Lauren closed her eyes for a second and exhaled. Grant nodded once, very slightly, as if to say he understood the structure of what had just been said even if he was only hearing parts of the history for the first time. My father looked older than he had 3 hours earlier. My mother stared at the floor. I walked to the door and opened it. Aaron was where he said he would be, a few feet down the corridor, giving us privacy without disappearing entirely. He straightened when the door opened, but did not ask a single question. I appreciated him more for that than I had the room downstairs. I turned back once before stepping out. "Enjoy the rest of the reception," I said. "The bar is covered through midnight." It was a plain sentence. It landed anyway. Then I left the suite. The hallway felt cooler than the room had. The music from downstairs came back gradually as I moved toward the stairs, first as bass through the floor, then as a recognizable song, then as voices, cutlery, and glasses once the reception doors opened again. I returned to table 18. The two younger relatives who had been seated near me earlier were on the dance floor by then, relieved, I think, to be anywhere else. My water glass was still where I had left it, a slice of lime drifting against the side. Someone had cleared my dinner plate. The chair was slightly turned out from the table from when I stood up before. I sat down and placed my bag in my lap. A few people glanced over, then looked away. A few gave me small nods. No one approached immediately, and I was grateful for that. Across the room, Lauren and Grant re-entered about 10 minutes later. They moved together this time with the private knowledge of people who had just had the floor taken out from under them and decided, at least for the night, to stand anyway. That told me something useful about their marriage. It might survive reality. My parents returned last. They did not come near my table. They stayed through another song, maybe two, then left through the side corridor without saying goodbye to me. I watched them go, not with triumph, not even with anger. Mostly with the strange stillness that follows a long-deferred administrative task. Something difficult, necessary, finally completed. Later, as the evening thinned out and guests drifted toward dessert, coffee, or the dance floor, Daniel Mercer crossed by my table once more. He did not stop fully, just slowed enough to say, "For what it's worth, you handled that with more discipline than most executives I know." I gave him a polite nod. "Thank you." He continued on. That was enough. By the time the last formalities ended, the truth had settled into the event the way weather settles over a property after sunset. No longer dramatic. Just present. Unavoidable. Adjusting every conversation underneath it. At 11, the final guests began leaving. I stayed until the room was nearly empty. Then I walked the property once with Aaron, checking exits, confirming vendor departures, reviewing incident notes, and making sure no loose ends had been left for morning staff. The courtyard was quiet again. Candles had burned low. The old brick walls held the day's cold. Somewhere in the distance, a car door shut and the sound carried across the lot. Aaron handed me the final event envelope with copies of the closeout notes. "Everything's secure," he said. "Good work tonight." He nodded. "You too." I almost smiled at that. Then I thanked him, got in my car, and drove home. When I reached my apartment, I sat in the dark for a moment before going inside. Not because I was overwhelmed. Because I could feel the shape of the silence waiting for me there, and I wanted 1 second to recognize it before I stepped into it. Then I picked up my bag, took the papers with me, and went in. When I got home that night, I changed out of the dress before I did anything else. I hung it up carefully, took the pins out of my hair one by one, washed my face, and put water on for tea. The apartment was quiet in that deep late-night way where even small sounds stand out. The cabinet door closing. The kettle beginning to warm. Fabric shifting when I sat down on the couch. I set the folder from my bag on the coffee table and looked at it for a moment without opening it. Then I put it away. That mattered more than anything else I did that night. Not rereading the papers. Not replaying the conversations. Just putting the file back where it belonged and letting the evening move out of active use. I drank my tea while it was still too hot, opened a window for a minute to let the cold air in, then closed it and went to bed. For the first time in years, I did not lie awake thinking about how my parents might be describing me to someone else. The next few weeks were quiet on my side, noisy on theirs. My phone lit up often enough that I finally turned notifications off for unknown calls. There were voicemails, texts, a long email from my mother, a shorter one from my father that sounded more formal than sincere at first read, then more tired than formal at second rate. I opened them. I read them. I did not answer. I had given them a process. Write, not call. So they wrote. That was enough for them. Lauren reached out differently. No speeches. No pressure. Just one message a few days later that said, I'm not asking you to make this easy. I just want to start being honest if you'll let me. I read it twice, then set the phone face down. Later that evening, I answered, coffee next week. Just us. We met at a cafe that was not mine and did not belong to anyone I knew. I chose it on purpose. Neutral space. Small tables. Bright window light. The smell of espresso and toasted bread. Cups moving against saucers. No memory attached. Lauren got there before I did. She stood when she saw me, then seemed unsure whether to hug me. I spared us both the awkwardness and sat down first. She followed. For a while we talked in plain sentences. Not emotional summaries. Not family mythology. Just facts. She asked about the stores. I told her enough for the outline. Lease strategy. Inventory controls. Which location had been hardest to stabilize. Which one surprised me by doing better than expected. She listened the way people do when they have finally understood that listening is part of love and not just a pause before their turn to speak. Then she asked about our parents. I stirred my coffee once before answering. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. She nodded. That's fair. And it was. That became the shape of things between us for a while. Not dramatic repair. Not instant closeness. Just better questions. Cleaner answers. More truth than performance. She started to ask about my work because she was actually interested, not because she had realized she ought to be. I noticed the difference immediately. A few months later, she and Grant came to one of my store openings. Not the biggest one. Not a polished flagship. Just a solid location I was proud of. Lauren walked the aisles with a real kind of curiosity, asking why produce was set the way it was, how I decided what neighborhoods needed, why one section got more space than another. Grant asked about margins and property taxes and laughed when I answered faster than he expected. It was one of the first times I had been with family and not felt edited down for their comfort. My parents kept writing. Some of the letters were apologies. Some were explanations. Some drifted too close to revision for my taste, and I set those aside. A couple were better. More specific. Less interested in defending their motives. More willing to name actions plainly. That mattered. I still did not respond. Not because I wanted them to suffer. Because silence, at that point, was no longer avoidance. It was measurement. I needed to see whether they could remain truthful without being rewarded immediately for it. People often confuse access with forgiveness. They are not the same thing. Life settled again the way it always eventually does. Quarterly reports came due. Roof maintenance had to be scheduled at one location. A freezer unit failed at another. One manager gave notice. A new hire turned out to be excellent. The venue moved into spring event season. I spent a Tuesday morning reviewing landscaping estimates and a Thursday afternoon checking a loading dock repair. My world returned to documents, people, timing, and routine. That return was comforting. Not because work distracts me from emotion, though sometimes it does. Because order reminds me who I am when other people's confusion gets loud. One afternoon in early summer, I was at the venue office going over an event calendar when I got a call from Grant's grandmother. I had spoken to her only briefly at the wedding, but I remembered her clearly. Straight posture, careful eyes. The kind of person who does not miss much even when others assume age has softened their attention. She said she hoped she wasn't intruding. I told her she wasn't. Then she said, I've been wanting to tell you something since that wedding, and I decided I was too old to wait for the perfect phrasing. I leaned back in the office chair and listened. She told me she had seen enough family behavior in her lifetime to recognize humiliation when it was dressed up as humor. She said the most impressive thing about me was not the properties or the money. It was that I had stayed composed when the room would have forgiven me for becoming cruel. I looked out the window while she talked. The courtyard was being reset for an evening event. 2 staff members were moving chairs into clean rows. The fountain had just been turned on for the season, and I could hear the water faintly through the glass. When she finished, I thanked her. Then she said, Don't let people reduce you to the version of you that made them comfortable. It was a simple sentence. Plain, not polished. That made it useful. After we hung up, I sat there for a minute without moving. Then I opened the next file on my desk and went back to work. That was the real ending, if there was one. Not the announcement. Not the private room upstairs. Not even my parents leaving early. The real ending was much quieter. It was the point at which I stopped waiting for my life to become legible to people who had benefited from not reading it closely. I still have boundaries with my parents. Some days that feels temporary. Some days it feels final. I have stopped trying to name it before it names itself. Lauren and I are better. Not perfect. Better in a way that is built on actual information now, and that gives it a chance. As for me, I kept building. Not to prove anything. Just because that was always what I was doing. And not long after all of this settled, another situation found its way to me. Different family. Different business. Same familiar pattern of someone quiet being treated like they had nothing to contribute right up until the paperwork said otherwise. I remember looking at the first email and thinking, I know this shape already. But that is for another time. For now, thank you for being here with me and listening all the way through. If this story stayed with you, I'd love for you to like and subscribe. In the comments, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And when you're ready, two popular stories will be waiting for you next.